Okay, this is basically, I could spend all day talking about databases, but I have to compress this into 20 or 30 minutes. So this is not going to be a comprehensive course in how to run your surgical practice off a database, but it's going to be a kind of short exposure to how to use a PDA-based database to help out in terms of record keeping, billing functions, all kinds of important functions in your office. Before we get started, I think it's useful to talk about what a database is. I mean, a database can be as simple as a bunch of index cards with the patient's name and the operation and the date you did it that you keep in your pocket. And I know that a couple of my colleagues at Mount Sinai like to keep databases like that of their patients. And it's got certain advantages. It's quick and easy. It's cheap to buy some 3x5 note cards, but it has a lot of problems. First of all, once you have more than 100 or so patients in your stack of note cards, it gets a little awkward to carry in your pocket. Certainly, if you lost your stack of note cards, you'd be in a bad situation. And it's hard to make a copy of your stack of note cards or give your whole stack to your biller or to turn that into a database or to do much with the data. So that's the motivation for taking your database and moving it either to your desktop computer or to your PDA. Now, there are a bunch of different programs that are available both for the Palm and for the Pocket PC. The one that I'm using to create the database that you're going to be seeing in this course is something called SprintDB, which is a program from a Korean company, similar to the way Access works on your desktop computer. Access is a program from Microsoft that allows you to create customized databases. It's very complex to use. It requires knowledge of programming, and most people don't actually take Access and create a database program for their surgical practice. They will hire some smart high school student to take care of it for them. And what I'm going to show you today is an application that was created by me, which is not quite finished, but it's pretty darn close, in this SprintDB database. Now, a database is something that many of us are familiar with. It's similar to a spreadsheet, and this is a picture of a spreadsheet here. But in a spreadsheet, you typically talk about rows and columns. In a database, you're talking about having tables, records, and fields. This is a table. So what we're looking at in blue here is a table. And each line on the table is a record. So the record is all the information about our first patient, Theodore Roosevelt. Each of the columns is a field. So you can see the first field is named patient number, the second field is named last name, the third field is named first. So when you put all the fields and records together, you get a table. One of the nice things about a database as opposed to a spreadsheet is that it allows you to enter your information using some nice forms. So instead of having to, click on a bunch of squares that all look the same in a spreadsheet, in a database we can create nice forms that have well laid out fields that allow us to see all our information at once in a more useful way. And then of course a database is only, you don't want to spend a lot of time putting information into a database if you can't get that information out in a useful way. The way we do that is by something called queries. A query is when you somehow ask a question of your database to get that information out. There are all kinds of fancy query languages such as SQL or SQL, which is a very powerful language, but that requires knowledge of computer programming. Instead of that, we're going to use a simple form to allow us to enter a query. In this situation, we're going to ask for our PDA to dump out our billing information. So without any further ado, why don't we switch from the didactic to the hands-on part. Let me switch this over. Okay, now in order to run this program, and if you're going along on the workbook, we're right now on page 23, and we're moving on to page 24. The name of the database program is SprintDB. So we're going to click on the Start menu, we're going to go to Programs, and then we're going to scroll down until we see SprintDB Pro, and we're going to click on that to open up the database. And that should take you directly to a screen that looks like this. Okay. going to give everyone just a second to get there. Okay, so does everyone have a screen that looks like this? All right, so what we're looking at now is a database that was created inside of SprintDB, and everything we're going to be... Okay, everyone's all set? All right. So what we're looking at now is the main screen of the program, and let's just take a quick walk through what we're looking at. We can see that this area at the top is a list of patient encounters. So anytime we do an operation, anytime we do a consult, anytime we see a patient or have any type of billable event, that would be a patient encounter. And these are all listed here in reverse chronological order. Some of the details of the highlighted encounter you can see down underneath. So for example, let's click on Woodrow Wilson here. On February 29th, 2004, we can see some information here. First of all, the date of the encounter for this one is 2/29/04. The hospital, you can't really see all of the information in this column, so let's widen that column a little bit. Let's see if we can kind of drag this over a little bit. Okay, it's St. Elsewhere Hospital that we did this operation in. Another way to scroll left and right is to just use this scroll bar over here. So if you want to see information which isn't appearing on the screen, you can use this little scroll bar here. If you want to see details, down here we can see that in this event we did a lap chole and a cholangiogram, and a laparoscopic gastric biopsy and a laparoscopic gastric bypass during this event. If we want to see some more details about this particular encounter, this is just kind of our first screen that gives us an overview of all our encounters. We can go over to the Edit Encounter button and click on that. And that takes us to a screen where we can review all the details of this particular encounter. So we can see that up in the upper left-hand corner, well, first of all, at the top it says that this is an encounter for Woodrow Wilson. The date of the encounter is February 29th, 2004. And this little thing tells us that it was 0 years, 1 month, and 2 days ago. So we know exactly how far out from the operation we are. The hospital is St. Elsewhere. We were the surgeon, and Rebecca Resident was assisting us. We have our medical record number and our account number and our dictation confirmation number if your hospital uses those. Again, you can see that we have all our procedures entered down here, and the CPT codes right next to the procedures have already been entered. And if we click on this little tab, you can see that the CPT tab is clicked now. If we click on DX for diagnosis, we can also see what the patient's diagnosis and ICD-9 codes are. And again, you can use your little scroll button to scroll up and scroll down. Now this is just information about this particular encounter. Let's say we want to get some demographic information about this patient. Well, let's close this window. In the upper right-hand corner, don't click on the OK, because that's going to close you out of the whole database program. Just click on this green close button, which is going to close down the window. Is everyone back at the first information screen? Good. All right, let's click on the Edit Patient button, and this is going to take us to the patient demographic information. It takes a minute to load. And you can see this takes us to a similar type of window. So here we have the patient's first and last name, their telephone number, their next of kin, the insurance, their date of birth. We can see our patient is 147 years old. We can see their sex. And here you have a list of all the patient encounters. Here there's only one listed in the patient encounter box. But we can see that the procedures that were done during that encounter are listed on the right. Now, if we wanted to, from this we could enter a new encounter or delete this patient encounter. And we see also that there's a little button down here that says complications. So if we click on that complications button, that's going to take us to a list of complications that we've entered for this patient. So we can track the complications that our patient has had. And here we don't see any complications, so we're happy about that. Now let's dive right in by entering some information about an imaginary patient. So let's close the complications window, and let's get back to that main window. Let's close that until we get back to this first patient encounter form. And right now we're at the bottom of page 29. We're going to enter information about a new patient. Okay, so I've put in some information here. We have a patient named Warren Harding, born 11/2/1865, and I put down some other information about him, and we'd like to get him into our database. Maybe we're about to start the operation. Maybe we're in the operating room, the resident's putting the Foley in, so we're going to get started while they're doing that to enter some information here. The way that we're going to do this is by clicking on New Patient, because this patient is not yet in our database. So you'll see at the very bottom there's a New Patient button. Let's click on that, and that will take us to a blank patient information form. So again, let's play around. You can enter in the information here, or you can make up your own information. Again, just click on the field to enter data into it, and you can make your little keyboard come up. Let's see, this is Mr. Harding, so we're going to type in Harding. First name is Warren. What's his telephone number is 555-1212, my favorite phone number. What's his insurance? Well, let's click on this little menu here. We don't want to have to type in the names of insurance companies every time, so we've put our most commonly used insurance companies into this list. Well, let's say he's Medicare. I think his age qualifies him. Date of birth, well, we have to enter that too. We see that his date of birth is 11/2/1865. So let's click on this little down arrow here under date of birth. First, we're going to go to the correct year. So let's click on the year to change it. And we need to go to 1865. I got to press the down arrow for a while to get back there. Well, that'll be close enough. And we want to get to November, so let's click on the month to change that to November. Here's a list. Let's choose November. And now we can just, let's see, what is it, November 2nd? There we go. Let's click on the 2. And then we'll say OK at the top of the calendar, and that will enter the date of birth and calculate the patient's age, which is 154.4 years old. We can also enter the gender of the patient by clicking on sex and choosing F or M as appropriate. All right, so we've just entered the demographic information for the patient's name, insurance information, but we haven't entered anything about a patient encounter yet. So if we went back to our patient encounter list, we wouldn't even see the patient there because the patient has had no encounters. If we want to enter information about this patient's operation, we would go down to New Encounter to enter some new information. So let's go down there and click on the New Encounter button at the bottom of the patient information form. And we can see it's already filled in a little bit of information for us. It's filled in that we have April 1st is the date, that's today's date, and we can see that that's 000 because that's today's date. In terms of hospital, we also have some pop-down lists here. Let's see, this is a tertiary central hospital. We want to enter our position. We are the surgeon in this case, not the first assistant or the second assistant. And we might have a list of assistants here. Let's see, how about Paul the PA? There we go. And again, we can enter a medical record number here if we want to. And you could do the same for account number, dictation number, anything you'd like. Now we need to enter an operation here. Oops, I seem to have already entered lap chole. Let's say I don't want lap chole there. I'm going to delete that. There's a little delete button here. Let's press delete, see if that works. Well, don't. I told you this is not quite released yet. This is version 0.9. When we get to version 1.0, messages like that will disappear. So you can see there's a little box right at the top of your CPT box here where we can click on the down arrow and have a list of all our commonly used operations. So let's say we're going to do a laparoscopic gastric bypass on this patient. Let's scroll down until we find laparoscopic gastric bypass, and we can see that the CPT code is already entered for laparoscopic gastric bypass. So I'm going to click on that, and that gets entered. And let's say we're also going to do a cholecystectomy on this patient. So I'm going to now choose lap chole with a cholangiogram.
What if you don't agree with the CPT code? Can you change it?
Let's say that you don't agree with the CPT code. You might want to modify some of these databases or add new CPT codes that you haven't entered yet. And I'm going to show you how to do that later on. We're also going to need to enter some diagnoses for this patient, so you can click on the Diagnosis tab over here at the right of the screen. You can see I've already entered chronic cholecystitis here. Let's enter morbid obesity. Let's see if we have that listed here for our gastric bypass. So morbid obesity is here. We can enter that. Let's say our patient also had sleep apnea. Here we go, sleep apnea. So these procedures are very easy to enter a number of procedures or diagnoses, and you can see that all the codes are already there. And these are codes that I've entered, so if I feel that the ICD-9 code or the CPT code should be different, it's going to be very easy to change that in the database, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit later on. Now, I'm a bariatric surgeon, so when I created this information, I like to keep track of a lot of details regarding bariatric surgery. So I made a special little button here that allows me to enter some particular bariatric data here. And if I click on that little bariatric button, it says, well, there's no bariatric record for this patient. Do I want to create one? And I do. So I click on yes. And this takes me to a very involved form which allows me to record many of the details of my procedure. And this is something that I personally like to do because I like to keep all these details of my patients. It's a lot of fields, and you can see this scrolls down here, and I can scroll down, and there's a lot of information here. But it's easy for me to enter this information because it's all simple drop-down menus. So I can say that this is a gastric bypass. My approach is laparoscopic. I can enter my patient's number of pounds, let's say 350 pounds. Oops. And about 68 inches tall. It automatically figures out my body mass index, which is displayed over here. And again, I can just keep going down if I want to and enter details about the type of stapler that I'm using and how many sutures I'm using on my proximal anastomosis and things like that, which are of interest to me because I'm a bariatric surgeon who likes to keep close tabs on his patients, but would probably not be of any interest to a general surgeon who doesn't do that particular procedure. Again, this database was created to be both a general purpose database and a bariatric database. Now, when we're done with that, we can choose Close. And we can see that the information about the encounter is there. And if we hit Close again, that will take us back out to the front menu. And we can see that our information should be there. And indeed, if we look at the very top of our list, I had to scroll up to get to the top of the list. We see on April 1st, we have that new operation, that encounter with Mr. Harding. And if I click on that, I can see down in the procedure box exactly what I entered. Now, like I said, any database is only as good as the information you can get out of it. So let's say that we wanted to generate billing information for all the cases that we did this past week or this past month or yesterday or this whole year. It's very straightforward to do. What we need to do is we're going to go to our database maintenance screen. You can see there's a button down here at the bottom. It says database maintenance. Let's click on that. And this takes us to another screen. It's a menu of options. The top option is to export our billing data. Let's click on that. And this is fairly straightforward. We want to export all the encounters that occurred, let's say between February, how about for the month of February? So I'm going to click, say February 1st will be the start date, and we can just export all our encounters. Why don't we just make it from February 1st till today? I click on the Export Now, and there are certain times when you ask your Pocket PC to do a very computationally intensive thing that it's going to take a little while. Again, this is not your desktop computer, so this is going to take a little while. And you're going to hear some beeping because as it starts exporting your data, it's going to beep once for each patient that it's exporting. Any questions while we're exporting? Where are we exporting to? That's an excellent question, and I'm going to wait 10 seconds before I answer that.
Is it possible to set that up so when you hot sync, the data will automatically be downloaded instead of having to go through this process?
It is not, for reasons that you will see as soon as we get a couple minutes further down. Yes?
Is there any import function for importing some of this demographic data?
As of in this early version of the program, no, but it will be in a soon-to-be released version. Again, what you're seeing here is a not quite ready for prime time. This is a pre-release version. This is where the software exists right now at the time of this course, and it'll probably be ready for release in another couple months. Now, there was a question as to where did this exported data go, and right now that it's done exporting the data, it needs a file name. So you can just type in any file name. I'm going to type in billing. And that's all you need to type in is the name of the file. And it's going to export it to a file named billing. It already gave it the right file type. It's a CSV, or a comma-separated file, comma-separated value file. And I'm going to say OK. And it tells me that it exported 4 records. Thank you very much. So now there is a file sitting on my Pocket PC with all this billing information in the form of what's called a comma-separated file. Now, what is a comma-separated? It's basically a spreadsheet file, but the good thing about it is that it can be read by any of the Microsoft programs. It can be read by Excel if you wanted to load it into a spreadsheet, but where it's really useful to load it into is to load it into Microsoft Word. You can use a function of Microsoft Word called mail merge to automatically create a billing form. And I've actually given you these files. We're not going to go through this right now because we don't have the Microsoft Word set up on Steve's computer. But I've given you all the files on your CD that you could set this up on your computer at home if you'd like. If you look on page 44, you can see what the billing encounter sheet looks like. What you're seeing on page 44 is the mail merge file. And I've just set it up to be a billing sheet the way I like it to look, but you could, this is just a Microsoft Word file. You can change it from saying Dr. Sage's Q laparoscope to being your name right there. You could change the format, you could move anything around. And you can see that anytime you see those little quote signs like patient name and then it says quote first, quote last, in those placeholders it's going to enter in the data that we just exported. So if you want to see what the sheet would look like after we use that data, on page 45 is what the final resultant billing encounter sheet would look like. Yes?
Somebody in your office has to take this information and put it in the billing program to get us billed?
In this, you could either print out a billing sheet and then send that off to your biller if that's the way your billing works, or if you have a billing program that can import comma-separated values, which is a very standard way of exporting data, then you could automatically feed this information right into your billing program.
Is there not a program that exists, billing program, that has an input-output system that will integrate with the Pocket PC? That would seem the most intelligent way to do it, because then you can dump your information directly into the billing program.
Absolutely. Well, most billing programs out there allow you to import any type of data, as long as it's in a standard format. And one of the standard formats is in this comma-separated type. This particular program requires you to, again, this is not meant to be a comprehensive overview of every database program out there. There are some database programs out there that would allow you to do that. To the best of my knowledge, they're all fairly expensive. Now, right. For example, at Dr. Gansos's institution, he can do all his charge capturing on a system-wide implementation, but that's many hundreds of thousands of dollars. Am I in the right ballpark for the hospital-wide application, if not more? This is not meant to be the be-all and end-all database. This is a simple standalone thing which you can implement for a small amount of money on your own. There was a question as to what do you do if you want to change the hospitals that are in that little drop-down menu, or you want to change the CPT codes that are given for a given procedure because the CPT code changed this year. Well, you can do that very easily by going again to the database maintenance window. So again, if you're at the main screen, you can just click on that database maintenance button. And instead of clicking on the export billing data button, we're going to edit our CPT codes. So let's click on edit procedures and CPT codes. And now this is just a little editing screen. We can see that edit record, we have 62 records entered. This is record 1 out of 62, and it's lap gastric bypass. Let's say, oh, we don't want to have it be -22. We just want it to be 43847. So we're going to change that. And well, let's scroll through and see some of our other ones. There's some little forward and backward buttons at the bottom. Let's press the forward button. Look at some of the other CPT codes we have here. Okay. So you can change any of the procedures. You can change any of the CPT codes. If you want to add a new procedure, you can click on this little button down here, the arrow with a star. And this is going to give you a blank record. This is now record 63 out of 63, and we're going to call this, we can say laparoscopic donor nephrectomy. And we can enter, when we don't know the CPT code, we're going to look that up later, so we'll just enter something there. And you can say close, and now that will show up in our list of, in our little drop-down list. We can do the same thing for our hospitals and locations. Let's say we want to change the hospitals and locations. We've got 3 hospitals. There's St. Elsewhere listed. We can scroll through Tertiary Central and Mount Miracle. Let's we can put a real hospital in. Let's say we want to have Mount Sinai. There we go. And now when I close this, when I go back, my little drop-down list is going to have that new thing there. And again, you can do the same thing. I haven't really gone into entering complications, but you can have a list of complications that you might see. And you can edit all these lists so that it makes it easy to enter data and to enter operations, complications, insurances. Yes?
Can you drop that 22 modifier on your list? Did that automatically change your prior records and drop the 22 modifier off all those?
Let's go take a look. So we entered for Mr. Harding a lap gastric bypass. Let's go edit that encounter and see if it changed the CPT code. And sure enough, it did. So when we look down here, we can see that by changing that, it has changed the CPT code as it was entered for Mr. Harding. So now we would have to export the data again, because we've already exported the data. But if you wanted to export this updated data, you would have to go through the export procedure again, and that would dump out all the information into this comma-separated file that could then be read by Microsoft Word or one of your databases on your Pocket PC. Mm-hmm.
On your laptop or your desktop, how can you alter all this data?
All this data can be easily read into Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Access. It can be read into Microsoft Word, and it's very easy to access it all on your desktop.
You can't use the same screens you've got on
You actually can, and that's something which it gets a little more involved, so I'm not going to be demonstrating that today. But you can actually run this same program on your desktop computer if you purchase. Again, all this has been done using this database program called SprintDB. On your CD that came with the course materials is a kind of free demo version of SprintDB, so you can play around with this at home if you decide it's useful. I mean, it's a very inexpensive program. It's about $30 to buy. In which case you could access the full functionality of all that, including being able to run a similar type of program like this on your desktop computer.
Is this similar to Handybase?
Handybase is another database program that's available for both Pocket PC and for Palm. This is not compatible with Handybase. Handybase uses proprietary files So you cannot exchange, the same way you can't easily exchange between Microsoft Word and yeah, different word processor unless you exported it as text.
Can you export this into Access?
Yes, very easily, because Access can directly read in that exported file, the CSV file. Any other questions?
Why don't you make the data into Access and use the Access data to data program?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
What about using the Access program, the database program instead of this program?
Why not using Access? Access does not exist on Pocket PC. If it did, I would certainly use it, but Access does not exist. It used to exist, and Microsoft took it off the market for Pocket PC.
How do you, what if you wanted to add another list of things to your database names? If you wanted a list of, say, second assistant or something, or
Okay, so what if you wanted to add another field or change the fields or delete a field because you're never going to use bariatric data? Again, that would require going in and reprogramming the database. So if you had a database programmer in your institution, you could do that, but it's a non-trivial task to do.
so it's not easy?
No, that's not it. The same way it's not really easy to write a Microsoft Access application. That's something you'd probably hire a programmer to do. All right.
Is this more difficult than writing an Access program? How would you need Boolean logic, for instance?
It's about as difficult as writing an Access program. So if you're familiar with writing programs in Access, you could use something like SprintDB to write a program like this. But it's definitely not something that you would want to. You kind of have to read a book to get started doing database programming. That's a non-trivial task.
But Handybase is fairly easy to set up a database. That's what I was asking.
Right. Handybase is very easy to set up a simple database. And if your goal was to just take, convert your stack of note cards where you have the patient's name and the patient's, date of operation and the name of their procedure, if you wanted to convert that very easily, you could use a program like Handybase. Where Handybase falls short is it's not what we call a relational database. So you can't have a number of different files all interacting with each other. For example, this program that you saw here has a list of all the hospitals, a list of all the CPT codes, a list of all the diagnoses, which are then all kind of held together in what's called a relational database. Access is a true relational database. SprintDB is a relational database. Handybase claims to be relational, but in fact is not. So in order to tie together all these different databases would be difficult in Handybase.
You sort of have to open up different databases and try to put them together.
Right.
Dan, for a year I used Handybase on a Pocket PC,
Mm-hmm.
and found when you tried to stress it on the Pocket PC, it just painfully slowed down to the point where it could only handle 40, 50 records, and then it just died. So I'd like to share that with anyone. If you're going to use a Pocket PC, don't mess with Handybase. You'll be afraid of all the time you've lost.
Yeah, I had a similar, I used Handybase for a while in the same way, and I found not so much that it was slow, but that it started corrupting my data, and little glitches would add up over time until it got to the point where, once it lost 6 months of information for me, I ditched it. And that's why I went over to this, which is a much more stable platform. If you use a database like Access or SprintDB, it will be...
My question would be, do you find SprintDB Pro to be a stable database?
It's extremely stable. It's like Microsoft Access. It's very stable and very fast, and you can handle thousands, literally thousands of records without a problem. I think, are we running out of time here, Steve? Okay. Yeah, next we're going to go to the outcomes database, and you'll get to see another database application. So anyway, again, this is not meant to be a comprehensive overview of every surgical database and the most advanced, enterprise billing system, but this is what you can do with a very simple piece of hardware, a relatively simple program, and it still allows you to keep a very comprehensive database of your patients and output that into a billing system. Again, this is something which, if you play with it at home, I think you'll get a better sense of its capabilities and its power to export data. What we're going to look at next is the SAGES outcomes database, and this is more of an enterprise level database which is going to allow SAGES to track outcomes.